Alright, so in level 3, things start to get a little tricky for a couple reasons. Partially because the factoring gets more complicated in 3 ways. So far we've factored GCF, just GCF, and now we're actually going to have to factor GCF sometimes first and then do more factoring after. Sometimes, like in letter A, there's going to be a factoring with the x squared x's and numbers, but the x squared is going to be more than 1, like a 2 in this case. That's going to cause another issue. And then we're also going to do difference of squares again with the perfect squares, but there'll be a number other than just x squared. It'll be like 4x squared, like you see C, which is a little complicated. That's actually probably the easiest of the 3 things. So here's what we need to do. First rule, especially in level 3, the first rule is check to see if there's a GCF and everything. So if we look at letter A, 2, 3, and 5, nothing can come out of those. And they don't all have an x. There's x squared, x, and nothing. So there is no GCF. So that's nice. Now, there's a couple ways to do this type of factoring, but I think I have a method that if you just follow these 3 or 4 steps, it's going to work out perfectly every time. But caution you, you have to do these steps in this order very precisely. Okay? So anytime you have a factoring problem where you have x squared, x, and a number, and specifically the x squared is not just x squared, it's a number, it's like 2x squared or 3x squared, something bigger than 1, this is what you do. The first thing is you multiply the first and last number together. The first and last number, when you multiply them, 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Now remember in normal factoring, like if we had x squared plus 3x plus 2, we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to get 2 and 2 numbers those 2 numbers have to add to get 3. Well, we're going to do that same thing now, except instead of multiplying to get negative 5, we have to multiply to get negative 10. That's why we do this. So you have to multiply to get negative 10 now and add to get negative 3. So what 2 numbers multiply to get negative 10 that add also to get negative 3? Well, 10 is 5 and 2, right? Okay. Well, what kind of 3 are we looking to get? We're trying to get a negative 3, right? So if we have negative 5 and positive 2, we get negative 3. So those are the 2 numbers we're going to want because they multiply to get negative 10, they add to get negative 3. Okay? Everything good so far? We multiplied 2 and negative 5, and then we found 2 numbers that multiply to get that number and add to get negative 3. Now, here's what you do. The first number in front is called the A number. It's the leading coefficient. Okay? We take that A number, that first number, and we're going to set up 2 fractions. Each time, the top number is that A number. So 2 over. The 2 numbers you're going to put on the bottom are the 2 numbers we just got. So we got a negative 5, and we got a 2. Alright, so the A, the leading number, that x squared number, goes on top. The 2 numbers you just got go on the bottom. And then with any fraction, you always got to simplify. So 2 over negative 5 doesn't reduce, so you keep it 2 over negative 5. But 2 over 2 does reduce. Now, a lot of people say 2 divided by 2 is 1, but you want to leave it as a fraction. So it's really 1 over 1. Okay, and that's important. You'll see why in a second. Last step. If you put, and this is just a helpful reminder, if you put an x on top for each fraction, you've now created your factors. First factor is 2x with a minus 5. The second factor is a 1x and a plus 1. That is now done. So there's really just a few steps here. First step, multiply to get negative 10. Second step, find the 2 numbers that multiply to get negative 10, add to get negative 3. Third step is write your 2 fractions. Fourth step is to simplify and write your answer down. That's it. That's all you do. If you remember that, every single time you will get these problems right, no matter what. Alright, so letter B. Now remember we said especially in level 3. Generally in factoring in general, but especially in level 3, see if there's a GCF first. So 15, 57, and 12. What can I take out of all those? Well, I know that I can take a 3 out of all of that, right? So 3 comes out. What's left over? Well, divide a 3 from everything. You get 5x squared plus 19x minus 4. Okay, now in level 3, because that's just level 1, we just factored out the GCF. That's level 1. That's all that is. In level 3, we're going to have an issue where this leftover stuff is probably going to factor. So our final answer is going to look something like 3 and then 2 sets of parentheses. We need to figure out those 2 sets of parentheses. So we got to do this problem inside the parentheses just like we did letter A. So what do we do first? We multiply 5 and -4, which makes -20. We need 2 numbers that multiply to get -20 and add to get 19. Okay, so you can take a few minutes, think about it, think about it, think about it. Hopefully eventually you get -1 and +20. Because -1 times 20 is -20. -1 plus 20 is 19. So then remember what we do. We take our first number, A, which is 5, and we put it over the 2 numbers we just got. Okay? And then we'd reduce. 5 over 1 doesn't reduce. Remember, you want to leave it as a fraction. And we put an x on top. 5 over 20 is 1/4. And again, we put an x on top. So our first factor is 5x minus 1. And again, the factor order doesn't really matter. And then x with a +4. Okay, that's why it's important to leave it as a fraction so you have both numbers there. And always leave the negatives on the bottom because the 5x won't be negative, but the 1 will. Okay, that's your answer. Again, a lot more complicated, but if you follow a couple steps, it's not going to be that bad. Alright, let me erase this, get this out of the way. Now, one of the things we learned in level 2 was difference of squares. Difference of squares occurs when you have 2 factors. 2 things, 2 expressions. And one of them has something squared, and the other one has something squared. And then there's a minus between. So I see 2 things. I see a minus between them, and both things are squared. Now, what makes 4x squared? Well, 4 is 2 and 2. X squared is obviously x and x. And then what makes 81? Well, that's 9 times 9. Remember, it's always perfect squares. Okay, I know 4 can be made by 1 and 4, but 1 and 4 aren't perfect squares. That doesn't work. Okay, and then remember what we learned is that 1 has to be positive, 1 has to be negative. Doesn't matter the order. That's it. We're done. Lastly, now I see 2 terms. I see a minus sign, but 18 and 98 aren't perfect squares. So I'm like, shoot, I can't do that. But remember, our first rule of factoring is, especially in level 3, you want to check to see if there's any GCFs in here. Now, 18 and 98 can divide by number, right? You can divide out a 2 out of that. And if you do, you get 9x squared minus 49. Now, what's beautiful about that is 9x squared and 49 are both perfect squares. So now we have created that. We have our 2 in front. What makes 9x squared? Well, 3x and 3x. And what's the square root of 49? What times itself is 7, right? So plus 7 and minus 7. Definitely more complicated, but definitely manageable if you just take your time and think. You have to practice it, though. Otherwise, you will not do well.